On February 24, 1986, a 29-year-old nursing director named Sherri Rasmussen was beaten, bitten, and shot 3 times inside her Van Nuys condo in Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Police Department called it a burglary gone wrong. Case closed, more or less. Sherri's father told detectives he knew exactly who killed his daughter. He gave them a name. He begged them to investigate. They told him he watched too much television. For 23 years, the real killer walked free. She got promoted, she got married, she won awards, and the whole time she was wearing an LAPD badge. But there was one thing she left behind at that crime scene in the San Fernando Valley: a bite mark on Sherri Rasmussen's arm. And inside that bite mark was a secret that would take 2 decades to unlock. This is the story of a murder the LAPD could have solved in 1986. The story of a family that never stopped fighting. And the story of a killer who thought her badge made her untouchable. If you believe forgotten victims deserve to have their stories told, subscribe to this channel. We cover cold cases that everyone else gave up on. And this one sat cold for 23 years before the truth finally came out. To understand how Sherri Rasmussen ended up dead on her own living room floor, you need to understand the kind of person she was. Because she wasn't just a name in a case file. She was someone who mattered. Sherri Ray Rasmussen was born on February 7, 1957 in Tucson, Arizona, and raised in a close-knit Seventh-day Adventist family. Her father, Nels, was a quiet, determined man. Her mother, Loretta, was warm and devoted. She had 2 sisters, Teresa and Connie. Teresa would later say that Sherri was the glue that held the family together. From childhood, she stood out. Her sister Connie remembered that in kindergarten, the teacher used Sherri as an assistant because she was so far ahead of the other kids. She was bright, driven, and kind in a way that people remembered decades later. She graduated from Thunderbird Adventist Academy and started college at La Sierra University when she was just 16 years old. She transferred to Loma Linda University for their nursing program and entered the profession at 20. From there, she moved to UCLA Medical Center, working in the coronary care unit, one of the highest pressure environments in any hospital. She earned her master's degree from UCLA by the time she was 23. She became head nurse of UCLA's coronary care and observation unit and served as an unpaid assistant clinical professor, lecturing nursing students on top of her regular shifts. By the time she was 27, she was the director of critical care nursing at Glendale Adventist Medical Center in Los Angeles, the youngest person to hold that title. She was 6 feet tall, athletic, and carried herself with a confidence that put patients and colleagues at ease. Her mother, Loretta, once said Sherri liked taking care of people and making sure things were done right, that people were cared for properly. Her father, Nels, remembered something Sherri told him about her ambition. She said she was going to elevate the stature of nursing in the nation. And he believed her. She was on her way. Nels worried about his daughter working late hospital shifts in Los Angeles, so he bought her a condo in Van Nuys with a drive-in garage, specifically so she would not have to walk the street after dark. Sherri paid him rent equal to his mortgage payment. That was the kind of relationship they had. Practical, loving, built on looking out for each other. Sherri Rasmussen was not just a victim. She was a woman who saved lives for a living, who outworked everyone around her, and who was building something meaningful. The story of what happened to her is not just a crime story. It is the story of what was stolen from the world when she died. If you are already pulled into this story, a like on this video helps more people find it. Now let me tell you how Sherri met the man who changed everything. In the early 1980s, a young mechanical engineering student named John Ruetten was living in Dykstra Hall at the University of California, Los Angeles. He was from San Diego, quiet, focused on his studies. After graduating in 1981, he took a job at Data Products, a computer peripherals manufacturer, and later moved to Micropolis, a hard drive company based in Chatsworth in the San Fernando Valley. He was building a conventional engineering career. Nothing flashy. Also living in Dykstra Hall during Rueten's time at UCLA was a woman named Stephanie Lazarus. She was a political science and sociology major from Simi Valley who played on the junior varsity women's basketball team. She was outgoing, athletic, and competitive. And she was interested in John Rueten. Between 1981 and 1984, the two had a casual, on-and-off physical relationship. Rueten would later testify under oath that they had slept together roughly 20 to 30 times over those years, but that he never considered Lazarus his girlfriend. He described it as friends with benefits, necking and fooling around. Nothing serious on his end. He did not introduce her to his family. He didn't consider them a couple. Lazarus saw things very differently. She took the relationship far more seriously than Rueten ever realized. She kept a footlocker of mementos connected to him. She once stole his clothes while he was in the shower. She photographed him while he slept in his underwear. That photograph would later be introduced as evidence at trial. Friends and acquaintances would later say she was deeply attached in a way that Rueten either did not see or chose not to acknowledge. In June 1984, everything shifted. Rueten met Sherri Rasmussen at a party in Los Angeles. The attraction was immediate. They started dating, and it became clear quickly that this was different from anything Rueten had experienced before. Sherri was warm, ambitious, grounded. She was the kind of person who made the people around her feel like they mattered. Within a year, Rueten was in love in a way he had never been with Lazarus. He and Sherri got engaged in June 1985 and married on November 23rd of that year at a ceremony surrounded by both families. For Lazarus, the engagement was devastating. She wrote in her diary after learning the news that she didn't feel like working and that her concentration was like -10. In August 1985, she wrote a letter to her mother confessing that she was truly in love with John and that the past year had torn her up inside. She said she wished it hadn't ended the way it did and that she didn't think she would ever understand his decision. And then Rueten made the choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. After he was already engaged to Sherri, he slept with Lazarus one final time. He would later say on the witness stand that he did it to give her closure. He called it a mistake. He wept when he admitted it. He never told Sherri. That single decision did not cause what happened next. Lazarus's obsession was already in motion long before that night, but it gave Lazarus a reason to believe the door was still open, and that belief would prove fatal. What Lazarus did next made it clear that this was not a woman moving on. By 1983, Stephanie Lazarus had joined the Los Angeles Police Department. Her first assignment was the Hollywood Division, one of the roughest in the city. Through the department, she purchased a Smith & Wesson Model 49, a .38 caliber revolver, as her backup firearm. In March 1985, she transferred to the quieter Devonshire Division in the San Fernando Valley. In the summer of 1985, not long after the engagement, Lazarus showed up at Glendale Adventist Medical Center, where Sherri worked as the director of critical care nursing. She was wearing short shorts and a tank top. She found Sherri and told her face-to-face that she and John were still sleeping together. She told Sherri that when the marriage failed, she would be there to pick up the pieces. Sherri looked at her and said the services would not be needed. Lazarus's response, according to what Sherri later told her father, was chilling. "If I can't have John, no one else will, including you." After that confrontation at the hospital, the harassment accelerated. There were hang-up calls at the couple's condo on Balboa Boulevard. In January 1986, just weeks before the murder, Lazarus showed up at the condo to drop off skis for Rueten to wax. She came back later, this time wearing her full LAPD uniform. She was armed. On another occasion, Sherri came home to find Lazarus standing in her own living room, in uniform, uninvited. Sherri told her to get out. Sherri confided in her father. She told Nels that she believed Lazarus was following her through the streets of Los Angeles, sometimes dressed like a boy. She described Lazarus's eyes as being able to see right through you. Nels listened carefully. He was a practical man, not someone who panicked easily. But something about these conversations with Sherri disturbed him deeply. The visits in uniform, the armed woman standing in his daughter's living room uninvited, the stalking in disguise. This was not normal jealousy. This was something darker. He filed it all away. Every detail, every conversation. He did not yet know how important those memories would become. He did not know that within weeks, his daughter would be dead on the floor of the condo he bought to keep her safe. Or that the woman Sherri feared would walk free for 23 years because the LAPD refused to listen to a father who was telling them the truth. This is what Sherri Rasmussen's final morning looked like. February 24th, 1986. A Monday. Los Angeles was overcast. John Ruetten left their condo on Balboa Boulevard around 7:20 in the morning, heading to his engineering job in Chatsworth. Sherri had been dealing with a back injury from an aerobics class and was dreading a motivational presentation she was supposed to give at the hospital that day. She told John she might call in sick. At 9:45 that morning, a neighbor in the complex noticed that the Ruettens' garage door was open and the silver BMW 318i, the car Nels had given Sherri as an engagement gift, was gone. At the time, nobody thought much of it. Around noon, a maid cleaning a nearby unit heard what sounded like two people fighting, something heavy falling. She assumed it was a domestic dispute and did not call the police. Around the same time, two men believed to be gardeners found Sherri's purse outside and returned it to a neighbor. Throughout the day, Ruetten tried calling home from work. The phone rang and rang. The answering machine, which the couple always switched on when they left the house, never picked up. He came home around 6 in the evening. There was broken glass in the driveway. The silver BMW was gone. Something was wrong. He walked through the front door and into the living room. Sherri was on the floor. She had been shot 3 times in the chest. Each wound was independently fatal. The bullets had pierced her heart, her lungs, and her spine. She had been beaten with a heavy porcelain vase that lay shattered nearby. She had been struck across the face with the barrel of a gun, hard enough to bruise the imprint of the muzzle into her skin. The coroner would document 15 separate injuries to her face, including a lacerated frenulum from the pistol whipping. 2 of her fingernails had been torn off in the struggle. Sherri Rasmussen had fought back with everything she had. The living room showed signs of a prolonged, violent struggle. A toppled credenza, broken furniture. The evidence told the story of a woman who did not go quietly. She fought for her life in that condo on Balboa Boulevard, and on her inner left forearm, there was a bite mark. Whoever attacked Sherri had bitten her during the struggle, hard enough to leave a clear impression in the skin. The gun had been fired through a quilted blanket, pressed against her body to muffle the sound. Someone had taken precautions to keep the neighbors from hearing the shots. Near the front door, stereo and video equipment had been stacked neatly, as if someone were in the middle of carrying it out. Sherri's BMW was missing from the garage. A bloody handprint was found on the wall next to the panic button of the burglar alarm. Sherri had tried to reach the alarm. She almost made it. But the jewelry in the bedroom sat untouched in plain view. The most portable, most valuable items in the condo had not been taken. And whoever stacked that stereo equipment had done it while wearing gloves. After Sherri was already dead or dying, the blood on the equipment was hers. It was not the scene of a robbery interrupted. It was a murder, dressed up to look like one. Sometime after 2 in the morning, a criminalist from the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office named Lloyd Mahaney arrived at the scene. He processed the evidence methodically, and then he noticed the bite mark on Sherri's forearm. He opened a swab kit, took a 6-inch sample of the saliva left inside the wound, and placed it in a glass tube with a red stopper. He sealed it inside a coroner's evidence envelope and booked it into evidence the next morning. That small tube was stored in a freezer at the coroner's office, separate from the main LAPD case file. It would sit there, untouched, for nearly 2 decades. It would outlast the lead detective's career. It would outlast multiple chiefs of police. And it would eventually solve the murder of Sherri Rasmussen. This case sat cold for 23 years. If you think every victim deserves a second chance at justice, hit subscribe. We tell the stories that almost stayed buried, and this one is far from over. The investigation into Sherri Rasmussen's murder was led by Detective Lyle Mayer out of the LAPD's Van Nuys division, partnered with Detective Steve Hooks. Within days, they had settled on their theory. This was a hot prowl burglary. Intruders entered through the front door, which had been left unlocked after a friend visited the previous evening. They were stacking electronics to steal when Sherri surprised them. They panicked, killed her, took her car, and fled. It was a clean, tidy theory. It fit into the kind of crime that Los Angeles saw every day in the mid-1980s. It let the detectives close the file without asking uncomfortable questions. And it was wrong. The problems with the burglary theory were obvious to anyone willing to look closely enough. Burglars almost never steal the victim's car. They drive their own. A daytime break-in at a gated condo complex was unusual and risky. The stereo equipment stacked near the front door had Sherri's blood on it in a thumbprint-shaped, printless stain, meaning whoever arranged that equipment was wearing gloves and did it after Sherri was already dead or dying. That is staging. That is someone trying to make a murder look like something else. The jewelry in the bedroom, the most portable and most valuable property in the entire condo, was left untouched in plain view. No burglar would stack cheap electronics and leave expensive jewelry behind. And then, there was the bite mark. Detective Hooks himself noted that the bite was unusual for a burglary. In violent physical struggles, bites are far more commonly inflicted by women than by men. The bite mark pointed toward a female attacker. Hooks observed it, and then nothing was done about it. Nels and Loretta Rasmussen arrived from Arizona the day after the murder. Nels sat down with Detective Mayer and told him everything. His daughter had been terrorized by a woman, an ex-girlfriend of John's, a police officer with the LAPD. Sherri had described the confrontation at the hospital, the hang-up phone calls, the uninvited visits in uniform, the stalking. Nels considered this woman the prime suspect from day one. He gave Mayer her description. He begged the detective to investigate. Mayer's response was brief. There is nothing there. When Nels pressed the Van Nuys detectives a second time, the dismissal was even more cutting. You watch too much television. John Ruetten also gave detectives Lazarus's name during a second interview. He was uncomfortable, and he held back the detail about sleeping with Lazarus after his engagement. But he named her. That conversation was never properly documented in the murder book. The notes either were never made or later vanished from the file. In 1988, 2 years after the murder, Nels wrote a letter directly to LAPD Chief Daryl Gates. He named the ex-girlfriend officer. He requested intervention. He received no reply. In 1993, 7 years into their nightmare, the Rasmussens met with LAPD detectives face to face. They offered to pay out of their own pockets for private DNA testing on the evidence collected from Sherri's body. They were turned down. The detectives told them to move on with their lives. About 11 days after the murder, the silver BMW 318i was recovered near Zombar Avenue and Cohasset Street, roughly 2 miles from the condo in the San Fernando Valley. It was unlocked with the keys still in the ignition. Investigators found fibers, possible bloodstains, and 4 unmatched fingerprints inside. None of them led anywhere. The car had been abandoned, not hidden. Whoever took it didn't care about it. They only needed it to stage the scene. At the end of 1986, the Rasmussen case was recorded as one of 293 unsolved LAPD homicides for that year. Los Angeles recorded 831 murders total. The department was overwhelmed. Detectives were handling enormous caseloads, and the pressure to close cases and move on was relentless. In that environment, a burglary homicide with no immediate leads was easy to shelve. But this was not a case with no leads. This was a case where the victim's family walked into the police station and named the killer, and the LAPD chose not to listen. Lyle Mayer retired from the department in 1991 without ever investigating the lead that Nels Rasmussen had handed him on a plate. The case file sat in a box, the bite mark swab sat in a freezer at the coroner's office, and the woman who killed Sherri Rasmussen sat at a desk inside an LAPD station polishing her badge. While the Rasmussen family was writing letters and begging for meetings and being told to move on with their lives, Stephanie Lazarus was building exactly the kind of career she wanted. 2 weeks after the murder, in March 1986, Lazarus walked into the Santa Monica Police Department and reported that her Smith & Wesson .38 caliber backup revolver had been stolen, the same caliber used to kill Sherri Rasmussen. She filed the report with Santa Monica Police instead of the LAPD, despite department regulations requiring officers to report stolen weapons internally. The gun was never recovered. That detail would not surface for decades. Lazarus continued climbing the ranks. She made detective in 1993. She married a fellow LAPD officer named Scott Young in 1996. They adopted a daughter around 2007. By 2006, she was working in the LAPD's RT theft detail, the only full-time municipal art crime unit in the entire country. She trained under veteran detective Don Hrisik and earned media coverage in 2008 when she and her partner recovered a stolen bronze Gold Rush statue called Dan the Miner from a park in Carthay Circle. She competed in police athletic events and won medals. She traveled to police Olympics competitions. Colleagues in the art theft detail described her as vivacious and supportive, the kind of detective you wanted on your team. Some of them had noticed a temper underneath the surface and given her the nickname Spazzaris behind her back. But nobody connected that temper to anything violent. She was a cop's cop. Think about that for a moment. The woman who had beaten, bitten, and shot a 29-year-old nurse inside her own home, who had staged a fake burglary to cover her tracks and reported her murder weapon stolen to a different police department to avoid internal scrutiny, spent the next 2 decades solving crimes, recovering stolen artwork, and building a reputation as one of the department's most dedicated officers. She sat in LAPD offices. She attended department functions. She worked cases. She earned commendations. And she worked in the same department that held the case file on the unsolved murder of Sherri Rasmussen, a file that, at one point, had contained notes mentioning her name. Notes that, over the years, would mysteriously disappear. And the file itself was not untouched. Investigative reporting would later reveal that interview recordings and handwritten notes referencing Lazarus had gone missing from the murder book over the years. Lazarus, as an LAPD detective, would have had plausible access to the case files during the 1990s. Whether she tampered with the evidence remains an allegation, never formally proven. But the gaps in the file are documented, and they are difficult to explain. In November 2001, the LAPD finally created something the department had needed for decades: a dedicated cold case homicide unit. Detective David Lamkin was tasked with leading a small team through roughly 7,745 unsolved homicide cases from 1960 to 1998. They sorted, categorized, and flagged approximately 1,400 cases that had forensic evidence worth retesting with modern DNA technology. The murder of Sherri Rasmussen was among them. Between 2004 and 2005, Detective Cliff Shepard pulled the Rasmussen file from the pile and began reviewing it with fresh eyes. Working alongside criminalist Jennifer Francis from the LAPD Scientific Investigation Division, he set out to determine whether the old biological evidence could still yield usable DNA. Francis tracked down the bite mark swab that Lloyd Mahaney had collected at the crime scene nearly 2 decades earlier. The glass tube with the red stopper, sealed inside its coroner's evidence envelope, had been sitting in a freezer at the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office since February 25, 1986. It had survived there precisely because it was stored separately from the main LAPD case file. If it had been kept with the murder book, there is no guarantee it would have still been intact. Francis ran the DNA. The result changed everything. The profile extracted from the bite mark belonged to an unidentified female. Not a male burglar. Not 2 male intruders. A woman. The entire burglary gone wrong theory, the foundation, the LAPD had built its case on for 19 years, collapsed in a single lab report. Everything the original detectives had assumed, everything they had told the Rasmussen family, everything that had kept the case frozen for 2 decades was demonstrably wrong. The DNA was run through CODIS, the national DNA database maintained by the FBI. No match was returned. The unknown woman's profile was not in the system. Stephanie Lazarus had never been arrested or required to submit a DNA sample, so her genetic profile simply did not exist in any law enforcement database. But Jennifer Francis saw the implications clearly. She had read the case file. She knew that the victim had been harassed by a third-party female before the murder, a woman connected to the victim's husband, a woman who was an LAPD officer. Francis suggested investigating this angle. She pushed for it. The supervising detective reportedly shut her down. The woman, he said, was not a part of this. Francis would later allege that she was pressured to steer away from the Lazarus lead and that she faced retaliation for pushing the issue. She would eventually file a lawsuit against the LAPD, claiming she had been punished for trying to follow the evidence where it led. The case went to trial in 2019, and a jury found for the city of Los Angeles. The verdict was upheld on appeal. But the fact that a criminalist had identified the right suspect in 2005 and been told to stand down is one of the most troubling elements of this entire case. Shepard, meanwhile, was reassigned to a serial killer task force. The Rasmussen file went back on the shelf. Shepard would later say his single greatest regret was not going back to interview John Ruetten. One conversation with Ruetten would have produced Lazarus's name, just as it had 19 years before when Ruetten told the original detectives and nobody wrote it down. The case could have been solved in 2005. The evidence was right there. The DNA was tested. The result pointed directly to a female killer. And someone decided not to follow the lead. The tube with the red stopper went back into storage. It would wait 3 more years for someone willing to listen to what it had to say. In March 2008, a Van Nuys homicide detective named Jim Nuttall found a box near his desk. Inside was the Rasmussen case file. Nuttall, along with his partner Pete Barba, supervisor Rob Bubb, and Detective Mark Martinez, cracked it open and started reading. 2 things jumped out at Nuttall immediately. The first was the 2005 DNA report showing the bite mark belonged to an unidentified female. The second was the stereo equipment staged at the front door, stained with Sherri's blood in a way that made no sense as a burglary. Nuttall's reasoning was straightforward. If you wanted that stereo equipment, he said later, you had every opportunity in the world to walk out the door with it. Why stack it and leave it? you start to draw the conclusion that murder was the main goal, not the burglary. He and his team re-theorized the case from scratch. This was not a burglary interrupted. This was a murder, staged to look like a burglary. And the killer was female. They compiled a list of 5 female suspects who had any connection to Sherri Rasmussen or to the circumstances of her death. The process was methodical. They would eliminate each woman one by one, either through alibi evidence or DNA comparison against the unknown female profile from the bite mark. The first 3 were eliminated quickly. Sherri's sister Teresa, her mother Loretta, and a close female friend all provided DNA samples. All cleared. Their profiles did not match the evidence from the crime scene. The 4th suspect, a disgruntled nurse from Glendale Adventist Medical Center who had clashed with Sherri over workplace issues, was eliminated through a covertly collected DNA sample. 4 down. The 5th name on the list was Stephanie Lazarus. Nuttall knew he needed to talk to John Ruetten. Carefully, without revealing the direction of the investigation, he made contact. The conversation that followed stunned him. Ruetten confirmed everything: the obsessive ex-girlfriend, the confrontations at the hospital and at the condo, the visits in full LAPD uniform, the threats. And the fact that Stephanie Lazarus was not just a jealous woman. She was a trained, armed Los Angeles police officer. Then Ruetten told Nuttall something that made the detective's blood run cold. He had given the original detectives Lazarus's name 23 years earlier. He had told them about the ex-girlfriend. He had told them she was a cop. And he had assumed for over 2 decades that the LAPD had investigated her and cleared her. They never investigated her, not once. And the conversation between Ruetten and the original detectives was never properly documented in the murder book. The notes either were never written or had been removed from the file at some point during the intervening years. The investigation became one of the most sensitive in LAPD history. Lazarus's husband, Scott Young, was also a detective working out of the Van Nuys division. Lazarus herself had access to LAPD databases and case records. If she found out she was being investigated, the evidence could disappear. She might run. The team referred to her only as number 5. They worked after hours. They developed cover stories to pull her old personnel records and firearms purchase history without raising suspicion inside the department. The evidence was building. The motive was documented in her own diary and letters. The .38 caliber bullets matched her backup weapon. The DNA pointed to a female, but they needed one final piece to lock it down: a DNA sample from Stephanie Lazarus herself. The detectives briefed their chain of command all the way up to LAPD Chief William Bratton. They coordinated with Deputy District Attorney Shannon Presby and the DA's office. Everyone understood the stakes. They were about to investigate a decorated colleague for murder. Under California law, voluntarily discarded DNA can be collected without a warrant. If Lazarus threw something away in public, they could take it and test it. They just had to wait for the right moment. On May 19, 2009, the detectives met with the LAPD's Professional Standards Bureau at an off-site location to coordinate surveillance. This was not a typical stakeout. Their target was a trained detective who knew how to spot a tail, who understood surveillance techniques, and who had spent decades working the streets of Los Angeles. One wrong move, one suspicious vehicle, one face she recognized from inside the department, and the entire operation would be burned. For about a week, plainclothes officers tailed Lazarus through her daily routine in and around the San Fernando Valley and Simi Valley. They watched her run errands. They watched her drive to and from work. They watched her eat. And they waited for the moment she would discard something with her DNA on it. It came on May 27, 2009. Lazarus drove to a Costco warehouse store in Simi Valley, the same suburban community where she had grown up. She walked through the massive aisles, made her purchases, and then stopped at the Costco food court. She picked up a lidded plastic cup with a straw and drank from it while she ate. When she finished her meal, she stood up, carried the cup to a trash can and threw it away. She walked out of the Costco and drove home. She had no idea that plainclothes LAPD officers were watching every move she made. The moment she left the food court, they moved in and retrieved the discarded cup and straw from the trash. At the LAPD Scientific Investigation Division, a DNA profile was developed from the saliva on the straw. Technicians compared it against the 23-year-old profile extracted from the bite mark on Sherri Rasmussen's arm. On May 29, 2009, the results came back. Supervisor Rob Bubb was on his day off when his phone rang. The lab confirmed what Nuttall's team had suspected for months. It was a match. Bubb would later describe that phone call as one of those gut-wrenching moments. The statistical odds that the DNA from the bite mark belonged to anyone other than Stephanie Lazarus were 1 in 1.7 sextillion. That is 17 followed by 20 zeros. In practical terms, it was certainty. After 23 years in a coroner's freezer, the bite mark on Sherri Rasmussen's arm had finally spoken. And it said the name that Nels Rasmussen had been saying since the day after the murder. Now they had to arrest one of their own. And they had to do it without giving her a chance to fight back. Chief Bratton ordered the arrest staged at Parker Center, the LAPD headquarters building in downtown Los Angeles. The plan was precise. Lazarus would be lured to the jail lockup area of the building, where officers are required to surrender their weapons and equipment belts before entering. That would eliminate the risk of a violent confrontation with a trained, armed detective. 2 robbery homicide division detectives were selected specifically for the operation: Greg Stearns and Dan Jaramillo. Neither of them had any personal connection to Lazarus. They had never worked with her. She would not recognize their faces. June 5, 2009, 6:40 in the morning. Jaramillo, wearing a concealed wire, walked over to Lazarus's desk in the art theft detail office. "Stephanie," he said, "do you know me? I am Dan Jaramillo. I work over here on the other side." He told her he had a jail suspect who was talking about stolen artwork. He needed her expertise for about 5 minutes. She agreed. She stood up, left her desk, and followed him. Once they were inside the secured area and she had surrendered her weapon, the conversation shifted. The detectives told Lazarus her name had come up in connection with an old case, the Rasmussen homicide from 1986. Lazarus's first response was casual. She said she could barely remember Ruetten's wife. Then when pressed, she admitted she may have met her at a hospital, may have talked to her once or twice or more. Her answers were careful, measured, and vague. As it became clear that she was not being consulted as an expert but questioned as a suspect, her composure began to crack. She told the detectives this was insane. She asked if she was on candid camera. She said she could not believe what was happening. When the detectives mentioned that DNA evidence had been recovered from the crime scene and asked whether she would be willing to provide a sample for comparison, Lazarus knew the conversation was over. She said she wanted to speak to a lawyer and stood up from the table. She made it as far as the hallway. Robbery Homicide Division detectives were waiting on the other side of the door. They placed her in handcuffs and read her Miranda rights. The woman who had walked into that building every day for over 2 decades, who had carried a badge and a gun and the authority of the Los Angeles Police Department, was now in custody for the murder of Sherri Rasmussen. She was booked into the very jail facility she had been lured to under false pretenses. The stolen art ruse had worked perfectly. She had surrendered her weapon voluntarily before the interrogation even began. Stephanie Lazarus was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder. Nearly 6 months later, Judge Robert Perry set bail at $10 million. It was a number designed to ensure she would not walk free before trial. She was allowed to formally retire from the Los Angeles Police Department, ending a career that had lasted more than 25 years. and spanned some of the most turbulent decades in the department's history. While Lazarus sat in a cell in Los Angeles, Detective Jim Nuttall boarded a plane. He flew to Arizona. He drove to the Rasmussen family home to deliver the news in person before the media got hold of it. Loretta Rasmussen, who had barely spoken to Nuttall during the investigation, crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. 23 years of silence, of dismissal, of being told to move on, and that there was nothing there. And now a detective had come to their door to say they finally knew the truth. The trial of Stephanie Lazarus began in February 2012 in Los Angeles Superior Court. Judge Robert Perry presided. The courtroom was packed. Down the hall, O.J. Simpson trial judge Lance Ito occasionally stopped by to sit in on the DNA testimony. It had been 26 years since the murder of Sherri Rasmussen. The prosecution was led by Deputy District Attorneys Shannon Presby and Paul Nuys. The defense was handled by Mark Overland. Presby opened with a single sentence that framed the entire case. He described it as a story about a bite, a bullet, a gun barrel, and a broken heart. The prosecution built its case on 4 pillars. The first was the DNA. The bite mark match at odds of 1 in 1.7 sextillion. The second was ballistics. The 3 bullets recovered from Sherri's body were federal .38+P rounds. Consistent with the Smith & Wesson revolver Lazarus had purchased through the police academy and then reported stolen to Santa Monica police 2 weeks after the murder. The third was motive. The diary entries, the letter to her mother, the hospital confrontation, the stalking, the obsessive behavior documented by multiple witnesses over the course of a year. And the fourth was Lazarus's own words from the pre-arrest interrogation, where she admitted knowing more than she first let on. Paul Nuys, in his closing argument, described Sherri Rasmussen as prey caught in a cage with a predator. The defense mounted the only argument available. Attorney Mark Overland told the jury that the DNA was compromised. He pointed out that the bite mark swab had been stored for 2 decades in a coroner's freezer, inside an evidence envelope that had developed a hole over time from degradation. He argued this could have allowed contamination or tampering. He emphasized that, apart from the DNA, no other physical evidence tied Lazarus to the crime scene. No fingerprints matching Lazarus, no hair, no fibers, no eyewitness placing her at the condo that day. He pointed to a bloody fingerprint on the wall that had never been analyzed or matched. He referenced a similar burglary that had occurred nearby around the same time, and in his closing argument he called the prosecution's entire case fluff and fill, arguing it was built on a single piece of compromised biological evidence that had sat in an imperfect storage environment for 20 years. It was a reasonable defense strategy given the circumstances. The prosecution had overwhelming DNA evidence but limited corroborating physical proof. The question was whether the jury believed the science. John Ruetten took the witness stand, and the weight of 26 years of guilt was visible on his face. He wept as he described his relationship with Lazarus. He admitted under oath that sleeping with her after his engagement to Sherri was a mistake he had carried with him for more than 2 decades. He told the court that Sherri was just trying to save her own life, that she had fought back against someone who came into their home to kill her, and that he lived every day knowing his past with Lazarus was the reason Sherri was dead. The jury consisted of 8 women and 4 men. They deliberated for approximately 8 hours, spread across 3 days. On March 8, 2012, they returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of first-degree murder. The gun use allegation was found true. On May 11, 2012, Judge Perry sentenced Stephanie Lazarus to 27 years to life in prison. That was the maximum sentence available under California state law. 25 years to life for the murder, plus 2 years for the firearm enhancement. Before sentencing, the family addressed the court. Loretta Rasmussen spoke of the extreme pain the family had endured and how every day they missed Sherri's laughter and her love. Ruetten, in tears, apologized to the Rasmussen family. He said that knowing Sherri met her death because she met and married him brought him to his knees. Chief Charlie Beck issued a public statement calling it a tragedy on every level and apologizing that it had taken so long to solve. District Attorney Steve Cooley said the case demonstrated the power of DNA evidence. Without it, he said, the case might never have been solved. Lazarus said nothing. The conviction was not the end of the story. Lazarus appealed in 2013, arguing that the age of the evidence denied her due process, the search warrant was flawed, her pre-arrest statements were improperly obtained, and evidence supporting the burglary theory had been wrongly excluded. In July 2015, a 3-judge appellate panel unanimously upheld the conviction. The California Supreme Court declined to hear the case in October 2015. The institutional damage to the LAPD was significant. The missing interview recordings and notes referencing Lazarus, the lack of documentation around Ruetten naming her as a suspect, the repeated dismissals of the Rasmussen family. Criminalist Jennifer Francis, the woman who had tested the DNA in 2005 and tried to point the investigation toward a female suspect, later sued the LAPD. She claimed she had been pressured to steer away from the Lazarus lead and had faced retaliation. A jury found for the city of Los Angeles in 2019, and the ruling was upheld on appeal. The Rasmussen's own civil suit against the city was dismissed on statute of limitations grounds. Then came November 2023, 37 years after the murder, 11 years after the conviction, a parole hearing at the California Institution for Women in Corona. Under California's youthful offender law, which grants special parole consideration to individuals who committed their crimes before the age of 26, Lazarus was eligible for a hearing. She had been 25 years old when she killed Sherri Rasmussen. And for the first time in 37 years, Stephanie Lazarus confessed. She told the parole board that it made her sick to this day that she took an oath to protect and serve people and instead took Sherri Rasmussen's life from her, a nurse. She admitted she went to the condo on Balboa Boulevard that February morning to confront Sherri. She admitted she planned to tie Sherri up. She said she was so angry that if Sherri got in her way to see John, she was going to strangle her. It was the first time she had ever acknowledged killing Sherri Rasmussen. Through the investigation, the arrest, the interrogation, the trial, the conviction, the sentencing, and over a decade of incarceration, she had maintained her silence. She confessed only when her freedom depended on it. A parole panel found her suitable for release. Governor Gavin Newsom intervened, noting that Lazarus had evaded justice for more than 2 decades and did not appear to have begun taking accountability until she was finally caught. In October 2024, the full parole board rescinded the grant. In February 2025, parole was denied again. Commissioner Kevin Chappell told Lazarus that her version of events did not match the evidence used to convict her. Deputy Commissioner Vijay Desai said the level of minimization she showed appeared deeply entrenched. John Ruetten attended the hearing. He referred to Lazarus only as the inmate. He told the board they were not there 38 years later because of an impulsive act. They were there because of skillful deception and complete disregard for the suffering of others. He said the inmate used her police training to cover up the crime and lied for decades until her only option was to pursue parole. Sherri's sisters, Teresa and Connie, told the board that Lazarus was a cold, calculating killer whose only reason for confessing was to get out of prison. Stephanie Lazarus remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women in Corona, California. She is 64 years old. Her next parole eligibility is 2028. Sherri Rasmussen was 29 years old when she died. She had been married for 3 months. 3 months. She and John Ruetten were still in the earliest chapters of their life together. They had just moved into the condo on Balboa Boulevard in Van Nuys. They were building a future. She was building a career that was already extraordinary by any measure. She had spent her entire adult life taking care of other people, working nights in coronary care units where patients came in fighting for their lives and she fought alongside them, lecturing nursing students who looked up to her, running one of the busiest critical care departments in Los Angeles before she turned 30. Her father said she wanted to elevate the stature of nursing in the nation. She was on her way. And then, a Monday morning in February 1986 took all of that away. Not a random crime, not a burglary gone wrong. A deliberate act of jealousy by a woman who had decided that if she could not have John Ruetten, no one could. The case against her killer was not built on a confession. It was not built on an eyewitness. It was not built on a fingerprint, or a fiber, or a strand of hair. It was built on a bite mark. A 6-inch swab taken by a coroner's criminalist in the middle of the night and placed in a glass tube with a red stopper. That tube sat in a freezer for 23 years while the killer got promoted, got married, won medals, and recovered stolen artwork for the same department that held the case file with her name buried inside it. Nels Rasmussen was right from the very first day. He told the LAPD who killed his daughter. He gave them the name. He begged them to investigate. They told him there was nothing there. They told him he watched too much television. They told him to move on with his life. He never moved on. He never stopped. Not in 1988, when his letter to the chief of police went unanswered. Not in 1993, when he offered to pay for DNA testing and was turned away. Not in all the years that followed, when the silence from the LAPD was deafening and the case file gathered dust in a box that nobody wanted to open. Nels Rasmussen carried the truth for 23 years. And when Detective Jim Nuttall finally knocked on his door in Arizona in June 2009 to say they had arrested Stephanie Lazarus, Nels did not say, "I told you so." His wife Loretta crossed the room and hugged the detective. Because after a generation of being ignored, someone had finally listened. It took a cold case unit, a tube with a red stopper in a coroner's freezer, a discarded cup at a Costco in Simi Valley, and a ruse inside the LAPD's own headquarters to prove what a grieving father knew the morning after he lost his daughter. Sherri Rasmussen deserved a full life. She got 3 years of marriage and a Monday morning in February. But she also got something else eventually. She got justice. Late, imperfect, and hard-won. Bought with the patience of a family that refused to let go, the diligence of detectives who came along decades too late, and a single biological trace that a killer left behind and a coroner's criminalist had the foresight to preserve. And that is what cold case redemption looks like. If you believe Sherri's story deserves to be heard, share this video. And if you want to see more cases where the forgotten finally found justice, subscribe to Cold Case Redemption. We will see you in the next one.